It's the year 2024, and whether you were born before or after video games were actually good, you're probably aware of the issues that plague gaming. Over-monetization, rushing out unfinished products, console exclusivity, and even more issues have become increasingly more prevalent throughout the video game ecosystem. Every now and then you come across a game that's just an absolute gem. It releases without rushed deadlines, microtransactions, and console exclusivity, and believe me, I am so glad to have incredible player experiences like Elden Ring and Baldur's Gate 3. Generally speaking, games that release and are well received by the community will have happy communities, which is one of the major reasons people thought that Wuthering Waves was going to fail. May 22nd, 2024 was when Wuthering Waves, a new anime open-world game, would release to many excited and skeptical players. And I'm not gonna lie to you guys, Wuthering Waves release was definitely, something. There were definitely bugs, a lot of them, but some people literally could not play the game. When I loaded up Wuthering Waves for the first time, I was on brand new, fully up-to-date hardware, so I didn't really have any issues, but some players experienced environments and terrain not loading, FPS drops, memory leaks, and a bunch more things that I can't find video examples of. And when Wuthering Waves sponsored me to talk about the game's newest updates, I specifically told them that they're not off the hook, and that I was going to talk about how bad that launch was. Now, to their credit, I think the response was pretty good. The Wuthering Waves dev team was quick to respond, sending out patch after patch after patch within days, and soon enough, almost all of the issues with actually being able to play and launch the game were pretty much resolved. But to say that everything was fixed would be a long shot. The whole world had their eyes on this launch. Gacha games are a worldwide phenomenon, and everyone was eyes on Wuthering Waves as one of the biggest releases of the year, with high expectations for a game with so much competition in the space. But unfortunately, a lot of the players were lost due to the rocky launch. It's not like players spent $60 on the game and then weren't able to get in but tried again later because that $60 was already spent. Wuthering Waves was a free-to-play game, and most people gave it one try, saw it didn't work, and gave up. Needless to say, the developers of Wuthering Waves and the entire team at Curl Games was probably sweating a little bit. To make it up to players, Wuthering Waves gave out tons of polls, which is a nice gesture, don't get me wrong, they saved me from having to swipe for Cheng Li. But more importantly than that, the sequence of events that took place after Wuthering Waves' launch was evidence that Wuwa development team really wanted people to give the game an honest try. Public perception of Wuthering Waves was super mixed. The players that could play it absolutely loved it, some players who could play it didn't like it, and a lot of players couldn't play it, so they hated it. And to be honest, would free polls save Wuthering Waves from being a failure? Probably not. I can name probably 20 different gacha games where the content is mid as hell and they try to compensate by just giving everyone gacha currency. Clearly, that's not going to be enough. What came next after all of the launch hiccups was the most surprising thing a lot of new-gen gacha players have seen in their gaming lifetime, which was a series of written updates from Wuthering Waves staff answering questions about bugs, the state of the game, and future updates. If you play other games where the developers are transparent with their communities, this probably isn't new to you. But as someone who's been gaming for 20 years now, I can confirm that transparency in live service games is far from the norm. Sure, you'll get updates here and there, maybe roadmaps, but since the live service model is usually in the interest of making money, you'll mostly see updates to cash shops rather than fixes and improvements requested by players. Now, to be clear, game developers aren't obligated by any means to tell you what they're planning to do. But with the increasing prevalence of live service games, where players sink their money in expecting a long-term investment, it definitely feels important. This sort of communication by Curl Games is really what kept a lot of players around who had started the game during its rough patch. For its rough launch, after they moved the Yinland banner forward, Curl Games brought in a ton of sales, signaling to both the community and the company that Wuthering Waves had a successful launch, despite the major stops along the way. But would Curl Games keep up the generosity and continue to try and improve the game, or was this just a show to get people on their side? Well, then comes the version 1.1 previews, featuring UI updates like layered maps, access to past quest dialogues in the gallery, changes to the chat box to look a lot better. They also added in tuner synthesis, which basically removed the issue players had with some resources being wasted, allowing you to create higher tier tuners with lower tier ones. There were tons of bugs fixed in 1.0, but 1.1 fixed up even more of them and introduced a ton of new content into the game, like new zones, new stories, new characters, including my wife. The rule is we're allowed one per game, weapons, echoes, and more. Version 1.1 was meant as not only a big game update to add more things to do, but also a sort of peace offering for players who may have quit at the start. This was Kuro Games' first major attempt to bring in new players and try and win over the players they lost, and they absolutely crushed it. I don't think people understand how much money this is. Something a lot of folks forget when they're looking at a game's success is that it's not about which game in the industry makes the most money. Believe it or not, just because a game doesn't bring in $40 million every single patch doesn't make the game dead. Considering the monetization of live service games is ongoing, and the fact that it definitely does not cost $40 million a month to keep the game running, the game and company are doing crazy well. Different games all have different levels of success. What many consumers don't understand is that a game isn't failing just because it's not numbers 1 through 10 on a chart, considering that a majority of the top mobile games are run by multi-billion-dollar corporations, but anyways, that's a whole other tangent. Wuthering Waves had an incredibly successful month after the team had gone out of their way to fix bugs and communicate with the community. Granted, there was also Chengli. The amount of players was slowly and steadily increasing, with plenty of newbies giving the game a shot now that it was actually playable. You might be thinking, well, Brax, of course they're gonna fix the game. That's their job. And I agree, because if they didn't, Kuro Games would be in a lot worse of a position. But there is a difference between doing the bare minimum, as most games do, and going above and beyond to keep a happy community. A great example of this is Final Fantasy XIV, which is known for having a passionate development team that aims to not only create the greatest game possible, but also make sure that the players are happy. Just one example of this is that rather than nerfing certain classes or jobs that are clearly overpowered or overtuned, they bring other jobs up, as they believe it makes players feel worse to take damage away than to just bring everyone else more damage. Now, does that lead to rough balance sometimes? You can ask the Arcadian tier, but that's something that can always be adjusted for later on. For the time being, the players are really happy with the game, at least most of the ones that I talk to, and myself. The Wuthering team worked hard to make the game not only more playable, but also just easier to play and access with different features that would make the game more convenient to play. But by version 1.2, they introduced a ton more game improvements. Not ones that anyone needed by any means, but things that definitely made the player base a lot happier. But as all things do eventually, Wuthering Waves fell off in monthly revenue a bit. And to be honest, every gacha game fell off around that time, but that's a subject for another video. Whether it's because of the limited character in the first half being one that players just weren't super interested in, or because of other external factors, that didn't stop Kuro Games from continuing to improve the game based on community feedback. In version 1.2 came new camera lock-on options, a new utility to help players deal with ranged puzzles to not force character switches, a feature to showcase characters to friends and just check out their animations, a new max FPS of 120, improved rewards from in-game challenges, and in my opinion, the best feature of all, wave plate or stamina storage, to help relieve players of FOMO for not spending their stamina every single day. On top of that, as a gift to the community for their continued support, Kuro Games would be giving out Shangli Yao, who's a top-tier DPS, for free. Considering this character's parallels to a certain PGR character, and also his power level, he'd probably sell a fair bit if they didn't give him away for free. So him being free is losing Kuro Games a ton of money. Now, I'm not going to sit here and pretend that Kuro Games and Wuthering Waves are a perfect company and development team. They've had their fair share of hiccups and things that they probably wish they could undo. But what makes Wuthering Waves different from many other modern games, including other gachas, is that the company wants to make money like everyone else, but their approach is very different. Rather than power creep every single character or lock certain content behind new characters, their approach is to improve the player experience by listening to the community feedback when there are clear issues. A game for the players. And in my opinion, that's how it should be. Most of us just want to play good games, and though many times the community has pretty terrible takes and feedback that we definitely shouldn't listen to, the most important thing for both the players and the developers is that the game is just good. If an entire community says that a game needs to change and it doesn't change, usually that game just loses its passionate players like many other live services. Even though Wuthering Waves lost a ton of possible players at the start of the game, it's rare to see a team care so much about making the game good at any cost, and that's why I'm a believer that Wuthering Waves will be around and continue to grow as time goes on. Because as a player of a live service game that's going to be constantly and ever changing, there is no better feeling than having your voice actually matter. Having a huge amount of casual players is definitely how you get your game more on the radar of other players and continue to grow and make money as a company. But even if the most passionate and dedicated players aren't the ones bringing you the most money, they are going to be the ones that continue to play the game, and so many developers in other live service games seem to have forgotten that. But so far, from an outside perspective, it looks like Kuro Games hasn't, and that's why I think this game is far from dead. It's got a long ways to go before that happens. Let me know what you guys think about Wuthering Waves so far, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.